Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And welcome to the FOLCS film series. Tonight's film, The Novice, presented in a partnership with our good friends at IFC Films. This is their film, and also our friends at She NYC, a New York-based theater company. The film opens tomorrow night here in New York and will be streaming nationwide, globally, on streaming services and video on demand. I'm urging you to watch this film. 250 of you fortunate ones received a screening opportunity, but this is a film not to be missed. And how do I know that? It just crushed it at the Tribeca Film Festival. It won everything you'd ever want to win. It won Best Feature Film, it won Best Actress, it won Best Cinematography. It was clearly a runaway hit. I think it's already received 6 Spirit Award nominations, and look throughout the further nominations as award season progresses. It is a film, I guess, ostensibly about a freshman girl who is trying to be a walk-on on the varsity crew team at her college. But the film is so much more than that. I would say it's a revisionist sports movie. It is a gay romance. It's a feminist anthem. It's, I would say, also a cautionary tale. It talks about the dark side of competitive collegiate athletics and sports, and also the dark side of relentless high achievement. For those of you who are sending kids off into the world, this is an interesting film that gives you a look at just one such girl. Discussing the film tonight is the film's director, Lauren Hadaway. She cut her teeth. There's Lauren. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us. Lauren is and very well known. She cut her teeth as a film and sound editor on such films as Justice League, yes, both of them, and even Whiplash, which was an Academy Award nominated film. The film is called The Novice, but she in no way is a novice as a film director. You are in the hands of a very sure-handed director. And we'll show that with you tonight in what she's discussing. We also have the film's star who just came off of her Best Actress Award in Tribeca, Isabelle Fuhrman, who plays Alex. Where is Isabelle? There she is. Hey, Isabelle. You may know her from the horror flick Orphan, which I understand she's reprised her role, and that film is coming out again in a sequel called Esther. She was in Tape. She was in the Hunger Games. I remember her in the Showtime series. Was it Masters in Sex? Is that what it was called? I think. Masters of Sex, right? Again, both a director and a filmmaker that are to be watched and have clearly arrived and are so clearly ready for prime time in every single way. If you're watching us live on Facebook, we always love that. Welcome. Make sure you come to folks.org to provide your email address for advance notice of future events. It's particularly important this week because I think next week's event, we're going to be broadcasting on YouTube, and we may not be on Facebook next week. So that's another reason to make sure that you go to folks.org and provide your email address. If you have a question for Lauren or Isabelle, go to the Q&A box. And leave it. Hopefully we'll get some time for that at the end. I think there's information in the chat box, which is what I've already said, that the film opens nationwide tomorrow, as well as video on demand. Both of you, welcome. This is really quite an achievement, Lauren, and quite a performance, Isabelle. Let's start with you, Lauren. You were a competitive rower in college. And in some ways, the film is like a personal Valentine to the sport. And in other ways, it's really a love-hate relationship with the sport. And I'm not ever assuming in our FOLCS events, we never assume anything is autobiographical because it's art. But I am wondering whether that was intentional, because it makes this, and we'll talk about this later, a very unusual sports film because this is not it's a romance about the film, about the sport, but it is grueling and demanding. And again, there's a love and a hate relationship. So tell us a little about what you had intended with that.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly spot on, and Isabelle and I talked about this at length. But because the challenge becomes like, I don't think rowing is actually inherently a cinematic sport. It's you're doing the same motion over and over. You're rowing backwards. You can't see where you're going. The challenge create a challenge that becomes like, how do you make it compelling? And furthermore, like, I wanted to do my version of an obsessed artist film, but without the external. There's not like a coach or a mother, or she's not trying to go to the Olympics. Like, everything's very internal, and this is not, a novel. This is a film. So the creative challenge becomes like, how do you put that on the screen and kind of in the speakers, and how do you evoke like what it's like to be obsessed and what it's like to row to an audience 99 out of 100 don't know anything about rowing, and hopefully most of whom have had this level of obsession about something. But what I really try to think of this loosely as is a relationship. There's the B story, the romance B story, yes, but the real romance in this film is between Alex and the sport of rowing, and framed it as such, in the sense that you have the initial kind of attraction, the chemistry across the room, the clunky beginnings, a little bit awkward, the first time making love at 500 frames a second, like a glorious, sexy, it was like, I'm going to objectify you, Isabelle, in this. And then being like the foggy row, the blissful foggy row halfway through the film is like the being in love and the bliss and like what could go wrong, and I found my soulmate. And then you have the slow toxic descent into this crumbling relationship, which is, I've been there romantically and unfortunately, and sort of in obsession in things. So that was a conscious choice, a conscious thing I spoke about with Isabelle. I mean, I used these 1960s love songs in these action sequences because that's kind of bleeding into that. I did not want to make your like average kind of inspirational sports film. It's supposed to, I want to subvert that a little bit and like lean into this kind of intensity. And that was the creative groundwork for everything.
Well, that's what I meant earlier when I said it's a revisionist sports movie, because it doesn't do anything other like the other sports movies. The point that you just made is an excellent one. There's really no coach. I mean, she's there, but she's not the key figure in this. This is not the moment for, the best supporting actress to have the coach, and everything from Rocky on. That's the big part, right? The Karate Kid, right? It's the coach it's the mentor. So yeah. You're right. Here, it's a much more isolating, compulsive, self-compulsive experience. And you're right. And I also think in terms of the relationship, it's more than that. There's sadomasochistic in ways, because it is a romance, and yet there's self-inflicted wounds. What this does to Alex, or actually the actress Isabelle's hands, right? There is like almost a stigmata that's, the damage that's done to one's palms simply to be a competitive rower is very much explored. And that not only does she accept it, she embraces it. It's part of the seduction.
Yeah, there is, like, I was going to say, the line between pain and someone told me once that, the difference between enjoying a roller coaster and being terrified, it's the exact same feeling and emotion and chemistry in the brain. It's just really kind of what happened to you leading up to that point that determines whether you interpret that feeling of adrenaline as like exciting or as terrifying. And I think the same can be said for the pain in that aspect, but also like, yeah, these in ways where this is a badge of honor. You have these physical scars of what you've been doing and that kind of thing. And like, I don't know, it's like looking through the red flags again of a relationship. You look past that, and you dive right in.
Also, when you look back, it's different. At the time, it's like, I remember personally, I was like, yeah, I'm really doing good. I'm getting these blisters, and then the blisters were painful. And I remember I would like kind of be upset about them, and then they'd callus over, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of awesome. Like, look at my hands, like all the work that I'm doing and putting into it. But like looking back, it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad, but it's like Lauren just said, it's like the red flags in the relationship that you're like, no, it's fine. It's not that big a deal. Like,
So,
how it's supposed to be.
Isabelle, why does Alex choose the crew team? Again, the movie is so emotionally complex. And there's so much there that Lauren leaves for the audience to reimagine, for themselves. We don't really know why. I mean, you had to play her as an actress who chose this particular varsity sport. We also don't really know much about her backstory. So we know she's obsessive and compulsive and relentless overachiever and overcompensates for sort of lack of natural talent. But we don't really know, other than very little glimpse from a former high school friend who is also, I think, a freshman with her, who at one point says to her something like, "You're processing." So there's some intimation that there's something in the backstory. Did you think in portraying the role that that was happening?
Well, Lauren and I spoke about this a ton, that, and she's mentioned this in a bunch of Q&As that we've had. She's like, this movie could be about ping pong. It just happened to be about rowing. Like this, the fact that it is rowing is simply because that's, what Lauren wanted to write, right? That's something that she knew that she wanted to write. It was a sport that she had never seen on film, and it's something she deeply understood. For the two of us, we've also discussed at length a lot of these questions, like why rowing? Why is she so like set on this goal? What is she going to do after this? Where did she come from? And like, we know the answers to these questions, but I think what's so beautiful about the movie is it really is a character study on grit and ambition and obsession and the lengths that someone will go to achieve a goal for themselves. And I don't think we've ever seen a story about that told in this way, where you as an audience member are taken by the hand and really led into this relationship. You as an audience member get to fall in love with rowing in a similar way that Alex does, with this like curiosity and fascination. And you're rooting for her to succeed as she is becoming the hero of the story. And when she kind of falls off this cliff and is the villain, you've gone too far as an audience member, and you're still rooting for her to succeed, even though you're also kind of hoping that she just slows down. And the answers to these questions, I think what's so special about this film is they change every single time that I've watched the movie. I had answers to these questions while I was filming, and they've changed since when I watched the movie as an audience member now. And I think that's what's really cool about our film, is as an audience member, you can watch it and see something completely different. And Lauren has said this, and we've had people come up to us after our Q&As and screenings and, basically tell us what they think the movie is, or what the answer to one of these questions is. And it's like, cool, if that's what you saw, like that's what this is. I think that's what great storytelling is being able to tell a story that universally affects everyone in a slightly different way, because art is subjective and no one's going to take away the same thing from the same story.
The thing too that I want to point out is I did want the why. The same reason that I think I didn't want to tell there's external pressure is the why. I think in film, because it is this visual medium, because we only have an hour and a half, 2.5 hours to tell a story, we simplify everything to, oh, this thing happened to her when she was 7 years old, or her mother was a rower, or like she's trying to do this. And like, that is not fucking life. Like my life, the way I am crazy, the way I am successful, the way I have grit, this is a culmination of thousands of little things that have happened to me over the course of my existence. And it is, and I understand for some people are going to watch this and be frustrated and want an answer like, why? Like, what? And the one thing I take away from last year, I was obsessively learning French a little bit, probably like Alex Dall learns French, during the pandemic. And I was only watching French films and series for the entire year of 2020 to kind of immerse myself in the language. But the thing that I love about French film that I really fucking notice is like, they don't hold your hand. They don't try to explain everything. They don't try to have every answer kind of like given to you by the end. And I like that. Like, I want people to walk out of this theater and be having a conversation. Like, I don't think letting go of having to give the answer. I wanted this film to feel like Inception, the spinning top. Like, you don't actually know, you don't know what time she got. You don't know if she did like all these things, and people come up to me and they're like, yeah, she did this. And I'm like, wow, I know the answer. I know it, but I'm not telling anybody. And people come up to me all the fucking time and they're so confident in their reading of it. And I'm like, you are so wrong, but I'm glad that you see this and see it is subjective and it is like for interpretation. And that's the beauty of film, is like we put ourselves in other people's shoes.
You used a very good analogy when you said French films, because what you're really saying, and I think this is the point that Isabelle was saying, is this film is unlike any other, surely, that's why I said revisionist sports movie, because if you think of like Hoosiers or Rocky or Rudy, right? It's not just that there's a mentoring coach, it's just that it has the typical Hollywood happy, life-affirming ending, right? That it wraps it up in a happy way with a trophy being jumping everyone's around, jumping around a trophy. And Lauren Hadaway just wasn't going to make that kind of a movie. There was going to be a lot more complexity to this. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but that you didn't want to close it up like a typical Hollywood movie. You wanted to do what I said before, and what apparently audience members are doing with you is they're finishing the movie for you. They're introducing their own ideas. You're making the audience think about a lot of things, right? About competitive sports, about women's sense of perfection. I mean, there's so much here. And I think that that's really what makes this truly, truly unique and truly unlike any other film, certainly any other sports film. Do you have a sense, either of you, of how you think audience members, you would think that they could walk out of the theater, how they would feel about collegiate sports? And the reason I'm asking is because, you know, nowadays the NCAA has decided to permit, name, image, and likeness, to have players profit from their name, image, and likeness, because it was always understood to be the commercial exploitation of student athletes, right? And so that they should be able to benefit somewhat. This film is so beyond that. This isn't about that kind of exploitation at all, although it does make an interesting point about scholarships and how important scholarships are, and why someone might go to the trouble of what Alex goes to for a scholarship, although we learned something about her as well in connection with scholarships. So do you have a sense about what's the takeaway about collegiate sports beyond just rowing, just collegiate sport itself, and for women in particular?
Well, I think first off, rowing is not like, no one at my school, or even half people didn't even know we had a rowing team, like because of Title IX, because of the exploitation of largely male sports, because they're ticket bearing, they're the ones who,
Right.
you know, that's just fucking the way life is. Like they draw the money. So if a program is spending $1 million on football, they have to do $1 million on women's sports. And rowing is a bougie sport. It's an expensive sport. It's like you know, a typical East Coast. Like I'm from a podunk redneck Texas town. I didn't know what the fuck rowing was until I got a flyer in the mail one day. And so yeah, I mean, I think there is that exploitative element in a way. And the thing that I found actually really interesting, none of this is consciously done, but people have come like in the Q&As and press and things, particularly non-Americans, have said how American this movie is and the story is. The hustle culture, and because even if the film isn't like the American classic sports story, the hustle culture, the competitive nature of it, the fact that Alex as an individual who is on a team is so competitive, like she's not a good fucking teammate. Like Alex is a shitty teammate, and I will be the first to admit that. Like she's on her own journey, but that's like such an American thing. And I think the other thing, I'm going off your tangent, your question here, but the other thing that's really interesting too with the pandemic, I think that everyone's evaluating work-life balance in a different way, and like working from home and all these, you know, like the minimum wage, all of these conversations are coming up, and they're kind of all in that framework too. But it's like, yeah, I wonder for myself, like I was on this rowing team, I will try and stand up and my back's fucked probably for life. And I'm like, was it all worth it? I don't know. I mean, I got a movie out of it, so maybe it was worth it. But for other girls, I don't know so much. But I don't know if I have a solution or answer to that. But there's college sports is tough. I
think it, you know, I think it's one of those parts of what you were saying, American hustle culture. Like there is this sort of emphasis on when you go, and when I remember when I was, you know, applying to college, it's like you can't just be a good student anymore. There's too many people. So you have to, if you're not like, you know, alumni kid, or you don't have the connections to get into a school, or, you know, or even if you do think you have some connection to get into a school, you know, through their rowing program, you know, there are ways, you know, that there are very few ways.
By the way, I'm sorry, that actually, you just reminded me of something, Isabelle.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened at USC.
Yeah,
right.
So
that's exactly what happened. It was the crew team.
Yeah.
And her form was so bad. Like on the photo,
her form was so bad. Oh,
I'm like,
Yeah.
but you know, that's the thing is like the you know, the whole college admissions process really, I think, breeds a competitive nature in young people that it can be really detrimental to your health in a massive way, because unless you know, your parents are loaded with money and they can help you get in and have someone, you know, take your SAT test, which hopefully that doesn't happen as much, if not at all anymore. I mean, I would hope, but you know, there are always those people that skate around those sorts of rules, and they get around it and their kids get in, and you go, you know, tour a school and you're like, what's this guy doing here? How do you get into this, like into Harvard, you know? And there's, you know, so then you have somebody like Alex, who's I think there are like a lot of people, you know, when you're that age, you're ambitious, you like a challenge, you want to go after something, you know, you find something that, you know, captivates you, that interests you. And there is something that I personally feel as a young woman that I think is, you know, there is this obsession that I think young women have with certain things, from like whether it's like a boy band in your youth or a certain celebrity or a person or a movie. Like I think there's some kind of like craziness in a cool way that women have, where like, especially when you're around a community of people who like it, it's like you all kind of feed off of like, oh my gosh, which I think it plays into this idea
I
of
mean,
like,
I don't think that's just women. I think that's just
yeah,
mob
yeah,
people and like the mob mentality of it.
the mob mentality of those sorts of things. Yeah.
So-
I mean, but me as a young woman growing up, that was something I always kind of noticed about myself, is like I would be fascinated by something to the point where I would like dive all in. It would be all I thought about for 3 to 4 weeks. And then all of a sudden it'd be like, well, I'm not really interested in that part of that anymore, you know? And I think that there's, you know, there is obviously deviations of that. Like, you know, I'm sure there's some men, not lots of men, who are like that as well. But in women's sports specifically, I think there is a sort of like, you know, masochism and competitive nature to it that isn't as front footed. I think, and I don't want to generalize by gender, but I think typically, you know, with men, when they have issues with each other, they tend to be very upfront about it. Women don't really talk very much about that sort of stuff. All of the competition is kind of underhanded and not really spoken about. And I actually really love this movie, that there's a character like Jamie in this movie who really is like willing to like be like, Alex, like, let's have a conversation about this and talk about it. Because I think you know, there really is this world that we get to dive into, which is this team dynamic that Lauren built so beautifully in this movie. So Alex isn't a part of it herself.
So Lauren, I like that you said a moment ago, you said two things. You mentioned the pandemic, and you mentioned teammate being a shitty teammate. You said it more graphically. I like the way you said it. So, but it made me think about that. I thought that there's something very important about that idea during the pandemic, because so much of this film is about Alex in isolation, right? It's worse than she's not a team player. You know, she's the last person in the amphitheater finishing exams. She's always alone. You know, the film captures her relentlessly, being relentless, but alone, you know, in her own head, whatever it is that she's torturing herself to take herself to the next pursuit, the next level. So I think that there is something there that makes me think, well, maybe Lauren, that kind of a person is naturally not well suited to being a teammate, right? I'm just wondering whether that there's something about, and I don't know if that's if there's a woman's dimension to that versus a man's dimension to that might make her, you know, that she's just on her own. It's a team sport, but she's not the one. In fact, in the film, that's made more clear when it looks like, you know, the teammates don't want to be her teammate.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I don't know, again, I don't like to parse things down to gender specifically. I know dudes who have that same kind of toxic level of I am the one, I'm the alpha wolf, I'm gonna fucking do this all alone. Like that's certainly on both sides, but I can't speak to the male culture as much. But the one thing I will say, like, yeah, she is alone. And the thing that was important to me in this film is Alex is not like antisocial. She chooses to be alone. Like I wanted to show very clearly, she has friends from high school. She can have a girlfriend. She can like go to a party. She can pick up a frat dude and like have a one night stand. Like she's a human being. She's complex, but she chooses. And I think there's this one thing, some book I was reading. I think it's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, which said something that I really related to. It's like, you're gonna have pain in your life no matter what you do. So you got to choose what pain is worth it for you. And I think Alex chooses like, this film is my existentialist anthem, and like nihilism, very crudely put, is like life has no meaning, period. But existentialism is life is meaningless, but you give it meaning, you choose your meaning. And for Alex, she has chosen, you're like, why rowing? This is the thing. She's like, I'm gonna fucking conquer this thing. There's a point in the film, she's like, I'm gonna fuck a frat guy, and she, you know, checks it off. Yeah. And it's on and on and on. And that's isolating because not everyone has the same, like, it's hard to, me and Isabelle get along, I think, really well in the sense because we're both these creatures who have this like competitive check, but not everyone's of that vibe. So yeah.
Hey, Lauren, the film is so challenging, which is why Best Actress is the right award for you, period. because there's a lot being asked of you here, Isabelle, because here's one thought that occurred to me. It's not just Alex in isolation, Isabelle. It's also that everything begins in darkness in this film for her, right? That everything begins at 5 a.m. Like there's a lot of just, creepy campus darkness that makes it feel almost like, noir-ish in a way. You could almost tell, that this movie has a kind of mysterious noir quality to it, in part because of the way it's shot and because of, I think of like Fritz Lang. I mean, literally, I'm comparing Hadaway to Fritz Lang. I think, it has that same kind of, like M, the campus is a character. In M, the campus, Berlin is a character. In this movie, the campus, the practice facility, the river, the buildings, the libraries, that one amphitheater she's always taking the exam in, it's a character. It's as if she cast it. And again, darkness is such a huge part of it. This is a tough role. You're playing a character that's starts in the darkness and is often alone.
Yeah, I mean that was. I mean, I was chuckling when you were saying, every day starts in darkness at like 5 a.m. because that was my life making this movie, and I never really thought about that, but it's true. There's nothing more. I don't know how to describe it, but waking up every morning at 4:30 is pretty much a mind fuck on a daily basis, because that's when your day starts and nobody's awake. You're driving on the roads, there's nobody there. It is an isolating sort of thing. And I think any person who has, like what Lauren was saying, is about like that we get along because we both have this kind of like gritty, ambitious creature. Like anybody who wants to succeed in something, I think there is something slightly isolating to that process at times, if not a lot of the time. I think, I've read like, I'm trying to remember that, I read this book by somebody named, I don't know if it's Walter Goggins, but the whole book was about like how you have to start your day at like 4 a.m. And it's true. Like when you want to succeed in something, the people who start the day early and spend the most time alone working towards it, for some reason, like over time, you watch them succeed. And that's, that's just because they have all of this time on their own to work towards their craft. And like with this movie, I mean, finding my character really, was finding it in this darkness, was waking up at 4:30 in the morning and rowing for 6 hours in the morning, and then working out during the day, and like finding this character in the moments where I was like absolutely exhausted when I would come home from filming for the day, and realizing that like, I have to carry this exhaustion into the next day because this is how I need to feel. I need to feel this like broken. I mean, it's a really interesting place to be. When you gain 12 pounds of muscle, you watch your entire body transform. You feel stronger physically than you've ever felt in your entire life. And yet you feel like mangled and broken emotionally because you're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, and you're really just like living for that day. And at the same time, you're like living off of this, like you were saying, like a masochistic high of like, every morning I'm waking up with like such purpose. Like as an actress, like a role like this comes along very rarely. And it's a challenge that I was like not only ready to take on, but I was like literally salivating at the mouth for. I mean, I went above and beyond on my audition. I wrote Lauren a letter. I basically like this doesn't work. I would say ever, I literally laid it all out there and was like, essentially like, please hire me. Like I'm the one for you. And I don't know if this, if another person had written the story, I don't know if they would have cast me. I think Lauren and I understood that we both had this, this like creature inside of us, this gritty, ambitious creature that could drive this through from beginning to end. And that was kind of like what I held on to as Alex on a daily basis, was that knowing that at my core, I could always fall back on that because I was there with her. I was living with her my entire experience filming this movie.
Well, that's what I meant when I was saying that we think of today of commercial exploitation of the student athlete, but this film goes so much deeper into the idea of like the soul destruction, because right? That it's really the overall commitment of what's being asked. Like, I don't think any film has really done that, to explore what it is being asked of a young girl who wants to be on the varsity crew team? What's being asked?
I would just say, I think that no one can exploit a person more than they can exploit themselves. Like
That's-
she wants these 2-a-days. She
Good
wants
point.
to be waking up at 5 and she wants to be rowing after school. Like when you want that challenge, you accept that challenge. Like,
yeah, and there's people that are like, there's people I like that are trying to tell her to relax. Like something no one sees her. Her coaches are like, calm down. Her friends are calm down. Her
In
girlfriend.
fact, she takes it as an insult, right? She's insulted every time she's been told relax, right?
and
Yeah.
I would personally too. Like if I was like in the middle of doing like a scene and I was like crying after a take, if Lauren came up to me and was like, hey, girl, you gotta calm down, I would be pissed, because it's like when you're in a zone or you're like, wanting to achieve something specifically and you feel like you're like just there, you're just reaching out for it, it's so close. There's nothing worse than when people are looking at what you yourself deem as mediocrity and applauding it, because and I think nobody can be a harsher critic on like, for at least for me, no one can criticize me worse than I can criticize myself, and I've done it. Like, and nobody can tell me I did a good job, and I won't believe it until I decide I've done a good job. And I think that's just something that I don't know, like, kind of like we're going back to the question of like, what are these questions? I don't know where that comes from. I don't think Alex knows where that comes from too. That's just something that is innate within her. And it's like Lauren said, it's this, complex tapestry of things that happened through your life that made her this person, or whether or not she was born with it. But that's what I feel genuinely at its core, is like, this movie is about this woman who's her own hero, her own villain of her own story, and she's the only one who could really get herself to stop.
So Lauren, I was wondering about when I mentioned all the things at the beginning that the movie is. It's all of these things at the same time. It does have I would say a gay romantic theme to it, but it is an undercurrent. It's clearly not the main theme. It's in there and it's important. It felt to me that it was important to you to put it there. Is that true? And to put it there in a way that doesn't distract or divert the viewer from all the other things that are going on, that you sort of a delicate balance. I want it here, but I want it to reinforce the other themes. I don't want it to detract from it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that diversity in storytelling is so important because it's the cliche, you write what you know. And I was on a women's rowing team, and I am a lesbian woman. Therefore, this is what you get. So it wasn't an effortful thing, and I appreciate the industry is trying to, I've been in fucking coffee shops in LA and you hear a bunch of like middle-aged dudes trying to put this queer women thing and they're trying to gender switch the role, and it just doesn't, it's just forced. I mean, it's well intentioned, but it's forced. So no, but the other thing I think too is like what we're severely lacking. Yes, we need stories of queer like oppression and overcoming those things, but we also need stories where just queer relationships just exist and like there's no fucking message narrative attached to it. And that's my message narrative here. But if you want to get really fucking crude of why the purpose of this relationship exists, is because like Alex needs to learn both in rowing and in terms of fucking life, like the horrible crude cliche. It's not about the size of the boat, it's about the motion of the ocean. So you compare these two events of like, she has this one night stand with this frat dude and he's just going and going and going. And it's like, all right, that was uneventful. And meanwhile, if you compare that to where Alex is in a rowing journey, like she's like not built to be a rower, and she's trying to muscle it and trying to win and try to fucking compete in the way everyone else is competing. And then she has a sexual experience with Danny, and it's like slow and sensual and like it is mind-blowing. And that for her is really the epiphany. Like it's not just about fucking jackrabbit, getting real crude here, just fucking beating it till the thing. There's more to it than that. There's finesse, like there's like movement and rhythm and all these things that matter. And like that's like the crude sort of story point of the relationship. But the other thing too that Danny exists for is like Alex is a proxy of my early 20s psychotic self. I didn't care about relationships. I didn't care about friendships. I didn't care about romantic stuff, eating good food, doing anything. Like I didn't eat bread for 5 years, for fuck's sake. Like I did not care about any of that stuff. And it wasn't until later in my late 20s that I started like dating I met someone who did prioritize all these things. And Danny, in some ways, is like a version, a proxy of my older self, who like appreciates the finer things in life. So Danny is just, and she's also the only warmth. Like if you look at how we shot the scenes, everything else is very icy cold, sort of expansive, isolating, or very claustrophobic and jaundicey. Danny is warm and she's like smooth, and everything about her is this different element. So she is meant to be this reprieve. And Alex has a way out, and Alex is capable of doing this. And she fucking pushes it away because she's a dog on a squirrel, and she's going to get that squirrel.
Well, it's funny when you're talking about, you know, this when you use the word stroke, because it is interesting that, you know, the juxtaposition between how you shot her, say in a single scull or whatever that's called, a single boat, you know, on the river by herself. You had some overhead shots, and there was almost a romantic way of showing her, you know, again, it had, I would say, almost, you know, a romantic element to it, as opposed to what we see in the dungeon, you know, in the practice facility on the machine. And I thought that that was interesting too, right? That the machine had the kind of sterile, loud, you know, jarring, it just didn't seem, it didn't have the serene quality of how you depicted her, even in the lightning, was superior to anything that was below ground. And I thought that there was a very strong metaphor there that kept coming back and back again and again and again.
Yeah, I mean, like you actually brought up the setting earlier, and I wanted to mention that it's like the setting, in some ways it did become a character. And the original way that I wrote the script, I had to imagine a much more kind of classic brick and mortar situation, and I did always imagine a basement because I had wrote in a basement when I was in college. But when we were,
is that actually common? The reason I was thinking, the only other time I've seen crew,
not common.
Yeah, because in the Social Network, the Winklevoss twins are rowing in some very cool looking boat that simulates water. I don't know if you remember that.
It's a tank. They had one at the school that we filmed at, and there was a conversation about doing it, but it was a very beautiful tank, and it was too pretty for our movie. That was like,
oh, I love that.
It just depends. I mean, when I was at my school program, we rode in a basement. Now they have apparently good facilities, and the team is doing well. But like, I wanted we were scouting within a 2-hour radius of Toronto, every single rowing club, and we almost didn't go to this particular school because it was 2 hours away, and the pictures looked like not right. Nothing seemed right. When we get there, it's like in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's like 2 hours from Toronto. And you roll up on this campus, which is literally this brutalist architecture. And I think there's a story of some guy on a hill doing acid, fucking designing this school built in the 1960s. the lecture hall that you referenced a few times, that is literally a nuclear bunker. This school is fucking insane, and like only Canadians could possibly go to that school and not lose their minds because they're so like full of life. And like, and then I when we were there, I was like, fuck, this is it. Like, and I reworked the script, I changed things, I made it a character in a location, and then that decision facilitated the basement of like, we found this 1850s army shoe factory with these weird ceilings of different heights, like Hobbit ceilings, and leaned into that, which then when we were looking for Danny's apartment, we found this location that actually started 4 locations, but the ceiling is like slanted. And I'm like, we have the most intimate scene of the film in here, and she can't even stand up. But then we lean into this as a character, like it's perfect. Like it fucking goes with the theme. This dog.
And the starkness and the contrast was so wonderfully done between the water versus the machine, above ground, below ground. You know, there was just,
I wanted it to feel like this is something I talked about early on, was in the lookbook, and like with the sound and with the cinematography, I wanted everything to be playing with highs and lows and dynamics. I feel like so often films like right in this middle ground, and I want to punch people in the face. Like, I'm not a subtle director. Someone else can do that. I want people to be jarred. I want them to feel unsettled. I want them to feel the anxiety of the character throughout this entire, 94 minutes.
So here's a question for both of you. Isabelle, did you want to add something to that?
I wanted to say also, part of how Lauren put together the whole movie was like, how does it actually feel to row? And what you're saying about the water being more serene. I mean, it does feel that way when you're out there alone on the water in the morning and the sun is rising. You have these moments where you're just like, gosh, it like, you know, like who wakes up at 4 a.m. and then gets to watch beautiful sunrises every single morning? Like it's a really special, beautiful place to be. And when you're in the boat with lots of people as well, I mean, there's a rhythm to it. You're like working in unison with everyone. When you're erging, it sucks. Like, because you're literally staring at a wall and at the little tiny like screen in front of you with the stats, and you're trying to keep your stroke exactly where it is, and you're trying to get a better time than you did the time before, and you're trying to push yourself, but you're also trying to be able to, you know, if it, depending on how long you're going to be rowing. And, you know, as much as like Lauren's mentioned this in other interviews, like you're rowing in a boat, you're staring at the ponytail of the girl in front of you for hours on end. Yeah, but I'd rather stare at a ponytail than stare at
yeah.
freaking screen the whole time. So I that juxtaposition, I think, feels exactly what it's like to be erging. And in that room, like teams do that. Like I remember when we filmed that scene where Alex is erging and she's like, you know, trying to get a better time before, you know, the end of winter break, before winter break, and all the girls like surround her and scream at her. Like when I was originally doing research for the movie, that was like videos that I found from every single Crew University like rowing page on YouTube, all across the country, all across the world. Is like, that is what it's like. You're erging and you have your entire team around you literally screaming at you. And that's just how it is. And that's like part of the team dynamic.
And I fucking always hated it. I was always like, leave me. And I was a bad teammate. I was like, leave me alone. Like you screaming in my ear actually makes me do worse. Like, because I am not an externally motivated person. If it's not happening from within me, it ain't fucking happening. Like just save your scream for someone else. That was always a huge thing in school.
So here's a question for both of you. And this is something I would say, Lauren, where I feel like it's a very visually stylized film. And I would say when it came to the editing, both sound and film editing, it was like there were so many moments that I thought you were like dribbling behind your back. You know, you were showing off how good you are as an editor because you actually cut your teeth as an editor. And I really felt that, saying, God, this director really knows about editing, because I thought there was a whole, and this is something I want Isabelle to chime in on, there was a whole, through metaphorical symbols and minute details where you're seeing Alex look at the wall or look at her notebook or look around or see the bulletin board. And then, you know, there's the visually image of the crab and all these metaphorical symbols that really, in my view, are sort of simulating Alex's mental processing, right? And this is exactly what movies can do that theater can't do, right? You can't do this. You kind of can do it in a novel, but you need a lot of pages for it. But what you did, Lauren, is you did it in short little bursts where you provided an enormous amount of interesting visual information that the audience could work with simply by montages and juxtapositions and jump cuts. And it really was, you know, I mean, I think that it's not just the film should win for best, you know, director, but also best editing. It really demonstrated your skill set coming into as a director, as a film editor.
Yeah, I mean, like the cliche, you write a film 3 times: when you write it, when you direct it, and when you edit it. And that is absolutely true. And like, if you look at the first draft of the script versus what we shot versus the assembly edit of this film versus the final form, it's very different. And the other thing I've seen coming from a first career in sound editing that I wanted to not get stuck into is, I think, especially on bigger studio movies, what happens is people do these really bold, cool things. And every time there's a temp mix or a playback or whatever, everyone gets a little nervous because it's a little, like, it's spiky. It's like, it's not smooth. There's like rough edges to it. And everyone dials it back. And after a couple iterations of this, you've sanded the edges off of this thing that you've created, and you just have this smooth thing, which is fine, whatever, but like, it doesn't, but you don't feel it in your hands the same way. So I wanted things to be jarring. And there was a moment too when we were mixing, like I almost fell into this trap of, there's a moment with the first kind of race where before she gets the oar in the face, of every time we cut into her, we hear this song, like this like romantic song, and every time we cut back to her, it gets more and more and more crispy, more and more distorted, more and more fucked up and twisted. And I had this moment like on the mix stage with Craig Mann, who I actually worked with on Whiplash, funnily enough. And I was like, is this too much? Is this too jarring? And he said to me, no, like you said, let's break it. Let's fucking break it. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And so I wanted to keep that with the sound editing, with the editing, like everything again. And as we talked about in the beginning, like this is such a subjective, she's internally motivated. There is no external force. So in order to tell the story without these traditionally film external things, stakes, you know, we fucking that word stakes, without these external things.
You mean what are the stakes to her?
Yeah, what are the stakes and what is the conflict? What is these things? And it's so internal with Alex that that's why none of the editing choices, none of the sound choices are just because this is cool. It's because this is how it fucking feels. Like I want to make the audience feel what she is fucking feeling. And so that really drove all of those choices too.
So Isabelle, for those of us who are not professional actors like you, so were you directed to understand that when I'm mixing sound and editing, I'm going to be creating this sort of information about Alex, and I need you to do things in the way you see things, in the way you stare at something, right? I mean, it just seems to me, it seems like a real jigsaw puzzle of how Lauren put this together. You must have had some real, communication that was almost not, written, that you actually knew how to communicate with each other because you knew what she needed.
I knew Lauren's background in sound, and working in this industry as an actress, you don't see the edit and you don't see the way that things shape out. You're only responsible for your job and what you can do while you're there. And, like Lauren said, editing is writing a script and filming a script and then into a movie and then editing it are three different rewriting processes. And I think that's so accurate for all films, but especially independent film. I mean, we only had 24 days plus a splinter day to film this movie, and that's not a lot of time.
Can I just ask a question? Because I think some people, we don't normally have this kind of discussion at FOLCS, so this is very helpful to our audience. Because they've been, we have people that have been doing this, watching us for 17 years. So this is really interesting, a moment that we've never really done before. Just briefly, while you're finishing that question, were there times that Lauren said, we have to go back and reshoot something because now that I'm editing something, I realize that I need you to look at something a certain way?
No, there was nothing like that. We didn't have time and we didn't have the money. Like there was no way we were going to go back and film anything else. We didn't have the money to do that. That's why Lauren
the ADR that we did, like we made a fucking fort in my living room during the pandemic and had Isabelle come in and did this ghetto ADR. And like,
we were trying to keep my dog and her dog from walking on the hardwood floor. Like that was the biggest problem with the ADR. So like, you're making a movie like this and there are parts of the film that we didn't have enough time to film. Like there was this, it seems completely stupid and non-existent now, but like there was a part of the movie where the coach didn't trust Alex to row in one of the nicer boats. So she was rowing in a crappy boat, and that she would win the around the lake row in this crappy boat. But we didn't have time to film that. So that was like something that wasn't even in the first assembly that Lauren did, because we just didn't have time to film that part of the story. But
reading, you're saying we only heard that she was in a crappy boat. We didn't see her in the crappy boat.
No, so we did. We shot that, but that was in the first assembly, but we cut that stuff out because it like took away, there was a whole storyline with the shitty boat. Yeah.
Yeah, it took away from the story. And so, the editing process, I was lucky enough, this is the first time I've done a movie where like Lauren and I not only connected like, in a working relationship, we became really good friends. And I've never actually worked on a film where a director has sent assemblies. I don't think that ever happens to an actor. I think the most that you see of a movie is like the director doesn't want you to know anything that's going on with it until it's done. And I think that's because a lot of actors get really self-conscious about stuff. But I was like, Lauren, just send it to me. I'd love to watch it. And I saw every iteration of this movie, and I watched how she changed and edited everything, how the sound design changed constantly, and how, funny enough, when I look at Lauren's lookbook that she made, that is where the sound design came through what she drew in the lookbook. All these repetitive repeating words, all of this kind of like on top of each other collage sort of pictures. But it's not something that was written out in the script. There were certain points, like especially the music, like the 1960s love songs, like that was a huge thing that Lauren talked to me about before. I had a playlist with all of them. And but the sound design is not something that I was even a part of. And I knew that Lauren was an incredible sound designer, but it wasn't until I watched the movie in, you know, for the first time on a big screen, and I would even say in the theater, because you know, that I fully understood how she like encapsulated this feeling. I mean, I could understand it watching the movie, but you know, I've never really paid attention to sound. And I think that's something that most people in film don't. And it's true. And it is a visual and an auditory medium, and we don't think about sound. We don't. And most directors know so much about lenses and lighting and the whole thing. And what's funny is like Lauren just was like, Todd, I don't know any of this. Like, you pick it. Like, we'll talk about it. The whole thing. Like, obviously, she would storyboard things with these horribly drawn stick figures, but you know, Lauren fully trusted Todd to do that. And I remember that the one thing that we were constantly laughing about and said is like, you know, every single time you film a scene outside, everyone wants, you know, sound always wants to get room tone. And Lauren's like, I've never used it. We don't have time for it. I don't want it. And like, that was the one thing that we were constantly like hearing from Lauren. Like the one thing that she would pick on from something from production was that she didn't want to waste the time on room tone, because she's like, I've never used it. I can pull stuff from silences in between stuff. And it wasn't until I'm watching the movie for the first time that I'm going, she created this entire story that all of the sounds make such a huge difference. Like even that moment where Alex gets bumped by Jamie and there's the big thunderclap that transitions to the next scene. I mean, everything had such a purpose and really added to like this downward spiral, to this love story, to this like grit and ambition and obsessiveness. And it really makes the audience feel that anxiety. And so Lauren, I think, has this like magical superpower with sound now. I'm like, you know, kind of obsessed with it. I think the sound in our movie, I'd be interested to just listen to our movie, not watch it.
I think the film is like a tutorial on how movies are put together, right? Because there's so many smaller elements that are clearly were not there at that time. You know, that was just not there. So like we're used to taking out our iPhone and filming something, and we realize, well, that's not what movies are, right? And Lauren's sort of taught a master class, and well, here's how you edit things with jump cuts and images and metaphors. Here's how you introduce music. Here's how you introduce light. And I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to give away the movie, but I thought the scene with the lightning in the river that toward the end is just devastating. Like it's really raucous and alluring, you know, and menacing at the same time. And the what they're saying to each other on the river, because that's like one time during where you're actually getting a sense of, you know, in a storm that the girls are actually communicating with each other and screaming at each other and, you know, giving each other direction. I just never seen anything like that in a movie. And in a way, it was such a crescendo. It was intended to be a building up of pace. And it was, you know, like such an incredible action sequence that required so many multiple elements to come in very quickly in order to make sense of it. Let me just ask one other question, perhaps, and then we'll take a question from the audience, and we'll say goodnight to our friends. You know, I'm just curious. I know you're not expert. You're not professing to be experts on even your own gender. But do you think that this film would be different if it was done with male crew rowers? Like, do you think that? And the reason I'm asking this is because you said, Lauren, that like, you know, she's a shitty teammate and nobody likes her. And it's true. You know, we're always told that women are more nurturing, right? But there's a little elements of her own, you know, selfishness or drive, as also in a Mean Girls quality to it. There's so much going on here of complexity. I'm wondering whether you think, oh, there's no way that a men's crew team this story would have made the same. We could have not done it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, again, this is generalizing, I admit 100%, but even seeing in media and what we see is like men tend to destroy outwards. They puff chests, they throw punches, they start wars. Like this is what we see. And I think women, speaking for myself and the women that I know close to me, we turn inwards, we destroy inwards. And so, you know, like in the sort of competition, Isabelle mentioned this earlier, is much more Machiavellian and sort of twisted. And I think that's fucking fascinating, like dealing with female team dynamics. And of course it existed across both genders, but there is something. And I think this way of competition and sort of backstabbing and things that women, maybe it's a mix of culture that it's developed this way. I don't know. But also too, I mean, there's scenes in the film with the sort of Alex is hurting herself at times. And like, that for me, I talked to Isabelle about this, and I know that this is sort of represented a lot of people, that kind of thing that I always heard most often about sort of self-harming is like, I do it to feel. And I told Isabelle about this, like, this isn't how I relate to it specifically. And I told her, like, for Alex, it's like, this isn't because she wants to feel something. It's because in this moment, she cannot feel anything. Like when you are so consumed with rage and frustration and like your body just goes numb. And when she wants to take out this frustration, but has the wherewithal to not want to, she's not going to punch a wall. I'm not going to punch her teammates. So she turns on herself because she can't feel in that moment. And I think like as someone who has gone through versions of this, it's like the thing, once you start feeling the pain, then you fucking stop. Like I wanted to also put that portrayal of this on the screen, which I haven't personally seen before either. So yeah, I mean, it is complex. I do think that there's a female competition element that we haven't seen as much. You know, a little bit of Mean Girls, sure, but it's yeah, I mean, there's women can be, we can be cruel to each other, that's for sure, I would say.
So here's a question from the audience, and I can tell you this should be a compliment to both of you. This name I recognize. I don't want to know if I should give his name away, but he's a world-class psychologist. So we're going to hear now a question from a world-class psychologist. I'm sort of thrilled to hear that he's watching us, but here goes. Alex was described as being psychotic, but wouldn't it be more accurate to characterize her as a bit disassociative? She is portrayed as someone who switches in and out of altered states, is driven by internal hallucinatory pressures, has all of her self-esteem poured into having to be best, seems to tolerate pain as though she has anesthetized herself, self-mutilates, and yet is extremely high functioning. This constellation is highly correlated with a history of severe early trauma. You're hearing from a world. I'm just curious what we would both say. I think it's very flattering to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And speaking as Alex as my proxy, and I have like, I find early trauma really interesting, generational trauma, early in the months, early childhood. And the thing about this is like, look, Alex is a proxy of my younger self in a lot of ways. And it goes back to like, what I said in the beginning of this is there's no singular moment that defined Alex and turned her this way. It's a collection of moments, and it is this exploration of it. And I think that, you know, I don't know if I would sort of, I don't know if you can, I mean, psychology is so complex because I feel like things overlap in this and that. But speaking for myself, like there's no singular trauma, there's no severe early trauma that these things manifested from. And again, that's why with the Alex, I think this is going to frustrate some people. I didn't want to give that single answer. Like I didn't want to say like her father beat her or she had this experience. Like I didn't want to do that because while that may represent a lot of people and that's a correlation we see, like it doesn't explain everyone. And so I wanted to.
Do you think there's a value to keeping it open so a world-class psychologist can analyze the film that way? Do you think there's a virtue in that?
Oh yeah, of course. Because people are fascinating creatures. Like, you know, every single year I look at the friends that I have that I've known forever and I'm like, you know, they evolve, they change, they constantly are new people and you're relearning people on a daily basis. And I think that that's something we as people forget is, you know, we see people with the projection of what we've already decided that they are. And every single day, I feel like we have an opportunity to look at someone and go, well, who are you today? Because people change on a daily basis. And me personally, I don't know where my grit and ambition, and I have a sort of slightly dissociative side of myself sometimes when I'm working towards something where I completely recluse. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to be around anybody. I just kind of like close the door and get in my own world and work. And that I didn't have any like early trauma in my life, but like who knows what it could have been. Maybe something could have happened in my life that would have changed that part of me that I've had since I was 5 years old. I don't know where it came from, but I
mean, I know your family, Isabelle, too, and there's like you have an interesting family history. I think that's like yeah. And here's the thing too. I mean, if we're gonna talk about get real fucking nerdy and talk about trauma here, there's this book Oprah is like, what happened to you? I mean, she's like the big name on it, but it goes into this idea of like, why do, it's like this, it's this this generalization that Black people are afraid of dogs, and they analyze this and going back, like why, like this person's never had an incident with a dog, but you go back to slavery when dogs were sent out to hunt people, and those people feared the bark, they feared the dog. And even if their child never had a dog, if you're walking with your child, you have a micro flinch reaction to it. Your child is a fucking sponge. It sponges everything up. And so that gets passed down, and that child has a child and the same kind of reactions. You're not even aware this is happening. But I think that is fucking fascinating. So there could be this generational element also at play that I think, even looking at my history and knowing Isabelle's family and things like that, like that's certainly something that I find fucking fascinating.
The Novice opens tomorrow, IFC Theater, and it's on video demand. See this movie. It is original. It is loving. It is heartbreaking. It is psychologically complex. It's noirish. And as you saw tonight with Lauren and Isabelle, you really saw two really great emerging artists who have really, in my view, have already arrived with these performances and this picture. Just wonderful performances from both of you and amazing direction. We're going to all be watching you, and hopefully we'll invite you back for another film, because this was really a very memorable, fun, enjoyable, and enlightening night. Before we say goodnight to Lauren and Isabelle, let's see, we have something scheduled for next week. Let's see, yep. I think it's Tuesday night for our FOLCS Conversation series. That's Gary Steingart. This is his new novel, Our Country Friends. It has already hit the New York Times bestseller list. And if you know anything about Gary, he's really funny and really charming. And Tuesday night, you'll see why. And see, we have anything else? Oh yeah, end of the year, good tidings and cheer. FOLCS is a nonprofit. It's a nice time to sign up for our mailing lists and also perhaps donate to FOLCS. We've been here throughout the entire pandemic, and we're happy to be providing this service to everyone free of charge for the last nearly 2 years now. Lauren, Isabelle, thank you both for joining us tonight. Make sure everyone who's watching, go watch The Novice starting tomorrow. And good luck to everyone, and stay healthy with the pandemic. Good night, everyone. I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS.
Thank you.